my first broader question on the term unified support system, it has to be defined and then expanded upon. And it takes so much to bring so many departments and states and specialities together to make it a unified support ecosystem. Could you elaborate on that term and in your views, how does the unified support ecosystem will play?
Look, thanks, Dev. And first of all, it's my pleasure to be here with you all. And I join in your earlier recognition of the traditional owners of this land and pay my respects to Aboriginal elders past and present and emerging. Look, friends, I think one of the reasons I'm here, Dev, is because I was one of the commissioners on the Disability Royal Commission. And I have to say, I read and reread the NDIS review many times. And let me say that my first impression of it is it's an incredibly thoughtful document, which I think calls out some very important issues. Actually, Holly made reference to a couple of them. I do think that they quite rightly called out the departure of the states. And let me just indulge a bit of Catholic guilt on my part. I was a state public servant at the time when the NDIS was introduced. And I was there under the instructions of people who were more senior to me, making sure that we made the best of what was available under the NDIS before we spent any state money. Let me tell you, that was due in part, look, before we just beat up on the states entirely, it was due in part to a design flaw in the NDIS to start with. It invited the states to that behaviour because a guarantee was made to them that the Commonwealth would pick up the tab for any increased spending under the NDIS. So it was a very real problem. Now look, I used to practice the dark art of politics once. I entirely understood that there was a good reason for that design flaw. It was to make sure that the NDIS would be universal. It was a tough thing to introduce, and it made sure that it was universally supported by everyone, regardless, to use Polly's terms, whether it was red or blue. So it was a design flaw designed for a time and place. Its time and place has come and gone, and it's time for us to repair that flaw, whatever reason it was there. I've learnt in the last few days, just to try and change the tone of this conversation a little bit, I appreciate the comments my friend Holly, Senator Hughes, made, but can I say I've learnt a really good word recently that I think applies to this discussion in disability field, and it's irenic. It's the ability to discuss something vigorously but aim towards peaceful resolution. It's not about having this discussion in a rough way and scoring points and all of that sort of thing. So as a former politician, I've left that sort of dogfight behind. It had its place. I used to do it. I don't do it now. I don't know how you feel, our former member for Herbert, but one of the great things about being involved in politics is leaving it. And I've had a really good life since. And can I say, I simply urge that this discussion happens vigorously, but with a view to being peaceful in its resolution, because we need to have an answer. We can't just have the fight. The fight's got to end. There is a vigorous discussion, for example, about special schools, and there's a vigorous discussion about whether group homes should stay open, and there's a vigorous discussion about what the state and Commonwealth should do. Let's have this discussion vigorously, robustly, on a factual basis, but do it with a view to finding a resolution and finding peace. It's fun having a brawl. I used to do that, but it's not very productive. So I'd simply say, I thank you for that. And I think that's the way we all have to produce this. And it was an experience. I wished I knew that word ironic. When I was on the Royal Commission, it would have been very handy. But anyway, in regard to a whole ecosystem, look, as I said, I was there at the time when, for example, we talked about early intervention in education. Oh, the NDIS can do it. In-home support for health conditions. Oh, the NDIS can do it. Housing, what a good idea. They're providing housing. Let's make sure everyone with a disability who needs housing, it's done by the NDIS. That behaviour does have to stop. And look, if I have a reservation about the the review documents, it kind of leaves open that problem needs to be solved, but it's a little woolly about how it might be solved. So that's something we've all got to work hard on, not complain about. We've got to work hard on it. For example, I write these things down because I forget them. The job that it left behind for the Commonwealth and the states to realise was something called was it a multilateral agreement or something or other? What the hell that means, I cannot imagine. But it looks like my old job as a public servant, that would have taken us 5 years to work that out, and there ain't 5 years to do it. So we do have to peacefully come towards real solutions that may not work first time, but they've got to at least start working. And there's a sense of that in the report that I really welcome. It does say that we're going to have to trial and experiment a bit and find a solution, for example, for the participant pathway. That's absolutely the right direction. They've admitted they don't have the answer. We've got to find it over time and work it out. Those things cannot take a lot of time. They will need us to work peacefully and patiently with each other to get them. It doesn't need to be red versus blue. It needs us all to get together, or green, and make sure that we all get together. But the whole ecosystem does need to be, there needs to be a seamless interaction between, in the education experience of people being given early support, but the education department needs to do its job. When a person with a disability enters a hospital, it needs to do its job, but it's got to do it seamlessly, making sure that people with disability realise their rights. And I've done something that Holly was doing, and I promise not to do it anymore. I've talked too long, but I just sort of thought, look, I ought to get those things off my chest as a participant in the Disability Royal Commission, because heavens, there's so much reform going to have to occur in the next 5 years. We will choke if we don't prioritise and work peacefully with each other to work our way through some really important agendas. And I probably thought I should say that to give people space, including Mr Shorten, including Holly Hughes. They need some space, we need to be patient, and we need to be productive in our conversation, because this is too important to lose.
Thank you. I wanted to move to Kathy. There's a term used in the NDIS review called the navigation supports, and then there's a whole model of we need to have navigators, and all Australians with disability will access navigators to help them navigate the system, and how much ever complex it might be. The person who might be a navigator, the job description has been defined in the NDIS review report across multiple sections. So you can't find the job description, but you have to join dots across. And that role has to navigate through not just the state, multiple departments, but the Commonwealth departments as well. So how do you envision the navigation and the navigation supports?
Thank you very much, Deb, for that. And thank you, John, for your words. I couldn't agree more. You're absolutely spot on. I'd just like to open by saying I too pay my respects to the elders, the Ngunnawal people here on the lands upon which we meet, and this land was never ceded. I'd like to open up before I go to that by simply saying we have now been given an opportunity, which I think is really important and should be at the basis of where we come from in our discussions. We can now focus on human rights. We can now focus on fairness, accessibility, and inclusion, regardless of disability. We're here to make sure that every citizen has the best life they can have. And people who are really important in that, in moving to your question, Deb, are carers and people with lived experience. What we do know is there's a talk of around 80,000 navigators that are going to be required. That's an extraordinary number of people. But let me say, or ask you the question, it's a bit rhetorical. Who are the best people to know how to navigate the system? Carers, family, and people with lived and living experience. They do it every single day. What carers say is their loved one is not the burden. The burden is navigating the system. That's the burden. It is. It's way too complex. So we have an opportunity here to go into this invaluable part of the ecosystem that is often left out, people with lived experience and carers, and say, we need your expertise. This could create employment opportunities for carers and people with lived experience. We know that in Australia there are 2.65 million unpaid carers, saving supports around $77.7 billion in taxpayers' money. Mostly they are women, and their superannuation has been eroded significantly because of that lack of opportunity to be employed, and I imagine the same thing applies for people with lived and living experience. What we will need, though, if we are going to have an effective workforce in this navigation period, to your point, we will need to have an education training system that has the skill set and competencies that meet the demand of a place-based navigator. People live in community. They do not live in an institution, a hospital or a facility. Unfortunately, for some of our elderly people, they do. However, we will need to have the voice of carers, lived and living experience, at the table at the beginning of every single conversation. Not come and ask us down the track, what do you think of this? That's not good enough anymore. We need to be at the table, regardless of the makeup of the people at the table. We also need to ensure that we have accessibility recognised in the employment place, particularly for carers and people with lived experience. This will also address another significant issue for carers particularly, and people with lived and living experience, in lack of superannuation for retirement. So we need to be addressing these issues, and I think the navigator role has a great opportunity, but in the big ecosystem, you will have to make sure our voice is at the table, not a second tokenistic choice. We are at the table, valued and respected from the very beginning of any words uttered in any planning, implementation strategies, doesn't matter, we need to be there. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. We'd like to move on to Phil now. The term foundational supports to be delivered through the Commonwealth via state agencies. And there are multiple state agencies. Senator Hawley has talked about Education Department. And you're from Victoria, and how do you see in the state of Victoria, how does that complexity of a scheme which has nationalized outcomes to be delivered through a state-run foundational model? So how do you manage that consistency of nationalized outcomes to be delivered across states and territories?
I'm an unpaid carer, well said, and I'm also a CEO of a disability support service, and my daughter, I think context is important, is a wonderful 22-year-old woman who's non-verbal and has a moderate ID who loves Emma Wiggle, if anyone's into Emma Wiggle. Emma Memma, as she's known now, yes. So I know a little bit about the intellectual disability camp and the autism camp, who are, I think it's always useful to remember, the two biggest groups under the NDIS, each about 30-odd%. So 60 to 65% of the NDIS are from those two camps, and I'm hoping over time we hear a lot more from those camps than current. Education, is really interesting. My daughter went through a special school, and I think, John, your words about peaceful, robust conversations are really good, because I don't think the answer for inclusive education is closing down choices that some people don't like. And I see in Victoria some wonderful things happening in inclusive education. We're a provider of support to 650 adults who are all trying to be the best they can be. So I think of ourselves, our disability organisation, as an educator, just like a TAFE, just like university, and it's always sort of puzzled me why there are these silos. People said to me, ARA's where people go to if they fail at TAFE. And I thought, oh my God, I hate the sound of that. Why aren't we the gateway to TAFE? Why aren't we on campus at Chisholm, in every campus? Why aren't we on campus at Monash University? Maybe my daughter isn't going to do a degree at Monash University, but she is relevant to the tertiary education experience. Incredible resources there. We want every graduate at Monash to come out understanding diversity and community. And how can they do that when they live in a bubble? And for something challenging, they head off to, I don't know, the third world somewhere to find, interesting populations when they're right here. So for me, teacher training is huge. We've done a thing with Monash now for 5 years now where adults with disabilities go to their main campus and buddy up with 2 pre-service teachers, 2 to 1, over 10 weeks. Have a cup of tea, have a chat, build a relationship, and it's just incredible seeing those pre-service teachers really learn about teaching someone with different abilities and stretch their knowledge and then figure out what works, what doesn't, and the parents cry at graduation because their kids are part of university. That's just a small example. That's an optional elective at Monash because they couldn't make it part of the curriculum because the curriculum apparently is, locked up and no one's allowed to touch it. But I don't know why every student going through Monash University isn't exposed to disability somehow. I studied law and economics at university, never heard from anyone with a disability about what those 2 systems meant for them. So I would hope that our education systems, there's a lot we can do for inclusive education by increasing choice and diversity. Diversity and inclusion, remember everybody, D and I, yeah? Sometimes there seems to be a group that want to end diversity because one size can fit all. So the other thing I want to say outside of education is community sporting clubs are mentioned in the review report. And they're wonderful organisations. We work with Mornington Footy Club. Those facilities are empty 9 till 3, Monday to Friday. So we have partnered with them to raise some funding. They're rebuilding this incredible sporting club, and we're now a foundation user of that. And I hope over time that those grants that councils and state government and federal government give are linked to disability inclusion as a mandated requirement for any facility that they build, because social procurement works like that in Victoria. I've got Lend-Lease knocking on our door saying, how can we work with you so I can meet my targets? And that only happens through mandating change. So I'm really excited about the future. I think there's lots we can do.
Thank you. Thank you, Phil. On the, Andrew, coming to you, with your organization, you have expanded and scaled up a startup in the plan management space. But from a broader point of view, the new participant pathway provides more opportunities than challenges. And then how, as we envision the new participant pathway, what are the things you see, and then from the experience and expertise, see that it should be included very early in the conversations?
Thanks, Deb, and thank you for the kind invitation to be a part of today. For those who don't know, Leap In, we're a plan manager and support coordinator. We're part of the broader Uniting family, and we were set up to provide and develop innovative service delivery models that were different to which Uniting had traditionally been involved within disability supports through its history. And so plan management and support coordination, from the Uniting side as we were working through the rollout of the scheme, we're really seeing some gaps in really the original navigation space. And it started with planning and getting that plan right in the first place, and really helping people be able to navigate what is, the intention, that foundational intention of creating empowerment from the get-go, and the intent of the scheme to create empowered and confident individuals. And yet the first point of engagement we always call the Oliver Twist moment around, please sir, can I have some more? And we saw outcomes at that first point, that getting the right plan in place that would meet needs, would have appropriate funding, and is so fundamental to then how a person's going to go about moving towards reaching their goals and living their best life. And so that's where we started. And then as you sort of have gone through the process, we then as a plan manager, and we're the largest, I think, not-for-profit plan manager in how we go about things. And we're also the most efficient within the plan management category, which is a bit unusual for, again, a not-for-profit provider. And, we've been very innovative, invested heavily in the technology to allow us to do that, combined with people. And I think, to the previous comments of our workforce is representative, 60% of people who have a lived experience, because what we do day in, day out is effectively support people around what we think is the grey line. That we have about 12,000 participants and families around the country who want to absolutely do the right thing in terms of take advantage of to make the most of and go about living their best life. But they're also incredibly conscious of the fact that, that it is a taxpayer-funded scheme, and they want to be compliant with how they go about doing that. And so the grey line in terms of where we sit in choice of control, dignity of risk, and reasonable and necessary, basically just leads to conversations. We'll have 500,000 of them this year with participants and providers around, is it okay? Can I? How do I go about? Who can help? Where? Who might have capacity? I want to do the right thing. And so I think the fact that the investment that we've been seeing in the review in terms of the recommendation, the new pathways of spend the time, get the plan right, really take the time, not just to get the plan right, but also have really clear conversations about, what the intent is, so that as you're going into the more, if you like, less grey, more clarity around the reasonable and necessary question, then people can go, great, I can then go about doing things, I can feel compliant, I'm meeting obligations as I go about really realising my goals. And I think the more we do that, so the more we can, if you like, be then and facilitate minimal administration to then allow the funding engine, if you like, which should be just right in the background and just happen, so that most effort and focus can be in service delivery and enablement. Then we take admin out, we have a more efficient scheme, best use, and we, making, again, for a community where, again, we get so much feedback of, people define themselves as professional form filler-inners if they're involved with the disability sector and have been forever, and that's admin. So the more admin we can take out of a person's life, then the more they can get on living with life. And so, our hope is within the pathway, we really have strong mechanisms for advice, and starting with the navigator roles at the human service and the service delivery and the supports end, but also within that reasonable and necessary side, and fitting in terms of the financial part of it as well, and that doesn't get lost, and the need and questioning that people have, as they're working through the implementation of their plans, that those needs don't get lost in the process as well, because the questions will be there. So we've just got to figure out what's the right way to go about addressing them.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew.